The next project I am working on is a 1894 shirtwaist. Here's the pattern illustration. Sorry about the motorcycles outside. And I have the sleeves cut out, sleeve facings, both front and back peplums, the waistband here, front facing, collar stand, and the front yoke piece. I did modify the front piece a little bit. I extended it about maybe 4 to 5 inches, and I'm going to try to do pin tucks instead of the gathering that they had. There is a back piece as well, but the back piece got a stain on it when the fabric got washed, and so I didn't get the stain out entirely. It's at the very center back right here on the pattern piece. I have enough to cut it out of my yardage back there, but I'm trying to keep that yardage intact for another project, so if I don't have to, then I'll try not to. But I did wash it out, and it is at least much less noticeable when I was washing it out, and it is drying outside now, so hopefully that will dry and it will be very not noticeable, if at all. So the first thing I'm going to do, I think the easiest thing to do right now is attack the peplum, because that's very easy because that involves some hemming and some gathering. So I think that's the first order of action here. The air conditioning is on in the background because it is over almost 100 degrees outside, so it is very hot, so please excuse that humming noise. I have finished the peplum on the shirtwaist, and I'm really happy with my top stitching, if that will focus here. I finally figured out the tension on my machine to do it nicely, so I'm very happy about that. The peplum is hemmed, and then the peplum is just gathered to fit the waistband. It's not going to be this weird in the back. It's going to flow nicely because I have this over a bustle, which I'm not going to wear this shirtwaist over a bustle, but I just didn't want to take the bustle off the dress form. And so the waistband is all done here, and also how the instructions have you sew it is that the interior waistband is also sewn as well, and so the shirtwaist is going to be sewn to the top here and then folded inward, and the interior waistband is going to finish everything. And instead of turning the front seam allowance under, I turned it over to match the top sewn placket on the shirtwaist, which is here. I decided to, like I said earlier, extend the front so I can do some pin tucks. So I got 4 pin tucks. They're about 5 1/8 inch wide. I think they look super cute. And also I have my placket that is top stitched, and I sewed on the yoke, and I just decided to do that top stitching as well, just to add a little bit of extra detail, and I'm super happy with how it came out. I think it looks super cute. So the next step is to see, hopefully my back piece is dry now, and I can iron that, attach the shoulders, and then we'll get started on the collar. I have constructed the main body of the shirtwaist. I have the front placket sewn in here. The collar and the collar stand is all sewn together and finished on the inside here. The peplum is attached to the main body of the shirtwaist, and again I still have my bustle on so it doesn't look nice in the back because it's not laying properly. But the main body is all done, except for buttons and buttonholes. But I need to look at the instructions to see how they want me to measure those. And then over here I have my sleeves that are all ironed and my sleeve facings. And so right now I have got to cook dinner, but tomorrow I will do the sleeves and then do the buttons, and the shirtwaist will be done. The shirtwaist is done. I am so happy with it. It looks so cute. The right side of the dress form Joan here, she has an arm. I don't have an arm for the other side because the dress form company didn't sell one. So we just got one arm. So you can see, like with an arm in it, how much poofier the sleeve is. And it's so, so cute. I got 8 buttons going down the front here. 8 buttons, 8 buttonholes. I had to place them really close to the edge. This will focus. There we go. I had to place them really close to the edge so the buttonhole would extend past the placket. Technically the pattern called for vertical buttonholes, but I like horizontal ones better. So that's just a personal preference. You can see the top stitching here. The collar, standing collar, this collar stand has a hook and eye, which won't close because the neck of this dress form is bigger than my neck. Puffs, super, super cute. And in case anyone is making this pattern, the puff, the gathering right here on the underarm seam actually goes towards the front of the sleeve because there's a notch right here you have to mark. You have to match with the front bodice. So this isn't marked on the pattern, so just kind of, if you're confused, that's how the sleeve looks, all nice and cute and puffed up there. And here's the sleeve from the other side. Sorry, I'm just doing some adjusting here. See, with an arm in it, it looks much nicer than the one without an arm in it. And also here at the cuff, I did the sleeve facing. I top stitched it just like I top stitched the placket here. So that all matches. The peplum's super cute. So I can wear this inside, tucked in a skirt, as well as outside a skirt. Because I was like, do I want to do a peplum or do I just want to do a one just ended a waistband? It's like, you know what? I'll do the peplum. Give me some options here. It's super cute. I think the pin tucks really are the focal point of the shirtwaist. And yeah, another garment checked off the list. On to the next project, which is making an 1898 walking skirt out of this pinstripe material. I used this material before to make an early 1890s ensemble here on the channel, and I had some extra fabric and I wanted to make a late Victorian skirt to go with the bodice that's over there in the corner. And what I'm going to do later on is I am just going to take the sleeves off that bodice and then just put in late 1890s sleeves instead. And I did lots of prep work this morning, and so this skirt, which I've actually made step-by-step on the channel before, I'll put that above and below. I have cut out each panel of the pinstripe, and each panel is also cut out of some black cotton for interlining, and they're serged together. And I also have ironed on some Pellon horsehair interfacing. Normally I would use the more historically accurate tarlatan, but I have very little, basically no tarlatan left, and I didn't want to have to wait to order it. I didn't want to order it and wait for it to come in to start on this project. And I was really happy I was able to cut out the facings of all the panels of the skirt using just my 1 yard of like 22-inch Pellon horsehair. I did, however, have to shorten the hem facing. Hem facing on the pattern is 7 inches wide, and mine here is 5 inches, but I think it's going to be okay. In addition to cutting out the main panels of the skirt and serging them, I also cut out the hem facing, which again is a little shorter. It's a shorter by about, it is shorter than the pattern called for by 1 inch, but I think that's okay. And so these are, I already pinned these all together, and then I'm going to pin it together and then serge the top of that. I also have cut out the placket and interfaced that with band roll as well as the waistband. And here, these are the hem facing pieces, by the way. I am going to be doing a banded detail on the bottom of the skirt like that. That is going to be made out of the contrasting blue fabric. Cotton fabric I used for the front of my bodice here. And so that's going to be the same along the bottom of the skirt. And this is all the fabric I had left from the cotton. And I didn't want to go out and get some more, mostly because I think I bought all they had at the store. And so I actually measured the width of the design on my bodice, because I'm also going to, on the banded detail, put the souttage trim as well. So I measured that, and that's 5 inches. And then so I had my pieces, measured that this 5 inches plus half an inch on each end for seam allowance, so 6 inches, and they all fit. I had to turn these two around. The grain line is on the cross grain instead of on grain, but seeing as how these are just decorative bands and not structural, I think it's going to be okay. But I'm happy that they all fit, so I'm excited about that. So I'm going to cut these things out, and then I am going to have lunch, and then come back and start constructing. Oh, and I also cut out a pocket, of course. This pocket piece isn't actually part of the pattern. It's from a Janet Arnold book, but I cut the pocket out as well. Forgive the abysmal state of my floors, but here is an update on the 1898 skirt. And so I have seamed together all the panels. So I have the front panel, side front, side back, and back. I have also sewn on the placket as well and finished it by hand here. And also I have sewn in a pocket on the right hand side as well. And I am going to flip the skirt over to show you the underside. Here is the skirt from the interior. As you see, I have also sewn on the hem facing as well. And so the hem facing, I sewed it to the bottom of the skirt by 1/2 inch, ironed it upward, did some understitching, and then I also sewed the hem facing on by machine. The reason being is that my banded detail here is going to go over the skirt, basically right there, and so it will cover up the hem, and so I just took a little shortcut there and did it by machine. And so right now the sun is setting, and so I'm going to stop the skirt for today, and tomorrow I am going to sew the souttage trim onto the banded detail over there, sew the banded detail onto the skirt. As you see, I did not sew the center back seam up yet because it's easier to do all that work, all the hem facing work and all the banded detail work when the skirt's lying flat. So after the banded detail is all done and sewn on, then I will actually sew the waistband on, because that's also easier sewing it when it's flat. I'll sew the waistband on, then do the center back seam, and I'm going to bind the skirt with wool braid. And so it doesn't get all, especially this fabric is rather thin and it frays everywhere. As you can see from the top of the waist seam of the skirt, it frays everywhere, and that's also why I stayed stitched 1/4 inch away from the top here. But overall, I did a lot of work on this skirt today, and it's turning out really nicely, and I will check back in tomorrow. This morning I had an unexpected work thing, and so I didn't really have a chance to work on the skirt. But now, in the afternoon, I sewed on the banded detail. And so what I did is that I sewed on these souttage details by hand. I sewed those on with the blue cotton strip before I attached it to the main skirt. Then I sewed it by machine to the main skirt with a large stitch length by machine. And then I sewed more souttage trim over the skirt. And so the skirt has, I believe, 14 souttage little flowers there. I put one on every seam and then one in between each seam. And then also what I did is I sewed the waistband on as well. And I need to trim some threads here, I see. And I also sewed on 2 hooks and eyes as well as finish the interior waistband. And so all I have left is I have to sew the center back seam here. And what I did is I left the banded detail, I left it free about 1 inch from the center back. And so I just fold all this stuff over, sew the center back, and then I'll have to sew this 2 inches here down by hand. And then also at the center back seam, I'm going to put one more souttage flower detail. And then after that is done, I will bind the skirt with wool braid, and it will be done. Here is the finished 1898 skirt. I am super happy with how this turned out, and I highly recommend this pattern for anyone getting started in historical costuming. It's super easy to follow, super simple, and it gives, as you see, gorgeous results. The skirt, I don't have a bum pad underneath the skirt, or actually the proper petticoat, because I just grabbed what petticoat I had nearest, which is actually my bustle petticoat, not my late Victorian one, but it still gives it a little bit of oomph. And down here you see the souttage trimming. I'm really happy with how that turned out. It gives a nice contrast with the rest of the skirt, but still being complementary. And then also you see I bound the edge there in wool braid. I'll give you a 360 tour here. That's from the front. And here it is from the side. As you see, it's gonna, when I have the proper bump head on it, it's going to jut out a little more in the back. And then I have just a couple little pleats here. And then I have hook and eye closures there. And then it has more, there you go. It has more souttage trim detail on the bottom here. And so I'm really happy with how it turned out. And then that's the bodice there. That's gonna be, I'm gonna replace the sleeves of that bodice to complement this new late Victorian skirt. Another garment, done. This is the next project I made. I didn't film any of the process because it was just sewing together an upper sleeve and a lower sleeve and hemming it and attaching it to the bodice, so I didn't really think any of that was that interesting. So this bodice I have made, it's my 1890 bodice. I've made it before here on the channel actually, and what I did is I ripped out the sleeves I made. They're sitting over there, and I drafted late Victorian, like 1897 sleeves. Here's the draft. I drafted the sleeve. This is Isabella Pritchard's The Victorian Dressmaker Volume 2, by the way. Great book. This whole series that she has, really great books. And I drafted it and I sewed it. It has an upper sleeve and lower sleeve like I just said, and I just sewed on a little bit of trim there to match the trim on other part of the ensemble. And so now the sleeve has proper volume for the late 1890s, and so I can wear it with my skirt that I just finished. And when I want to wear it with an early 1890s skirt that I made on the channel before, then I just rip those sleeves out and put those sleeves back in. It will take like 10 minutes max. So that is another, it's not a full garment, but it's a new set of sleeves is completed. The next project we have is a hat to match my 1890s ensemble that I just finished. I have made a hat using this pattern before on the channel. It is that, there we go, that hat in the corner there. And I'm going to do a few things differently on this hat though. The pattern as it stands, view B, actually has a greater amount of brim in the front than in the back. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to have just an even amount of brim around. And so it's a little bit smaller of a hat, and I think it suits the style of hat that I'm going for a little bit better. And so what I did is I sewed a piece of wire around the circumference of it and in middle here, and then I put some cotton flannel on the underside where all the wire was so it'll be smooth, and I basted that around the seam allowance there. And then I also cut a bias strip of cotton flannel and I put it around the outside to smooth that edge. And also construction wise, I'm doing it a little differently as well. On that hat over there in the corner, what I did is I constructed the tip, crown, and brim separately and put it together. I'm still going to cover the brim separately. What I decided to do is put the tip and crown piece all together already. So I'm trying to create a smooth edge over here because the hat before, this is the same hat I used. I didn't make this hat on the channel, but it's the same pattern. I'm trying to zoom in here. There you go. You see how there is a little, there you go, right there where the tip and the crown meet, there's that little bump. I'm trying to smooth that out there. So that is why I am putting them together. And they're both individually wired, same way that I wired them in that video. and I am covering the edges with some more bias cut cotton flannel to secure it. And then tomorrow I will cover this piece, cover that piece, and then stitch them together. And we have Scarlett here. Hi, Scarlett. She is guarding the silk fabric, so don't worry, everyone. The silk fabric is well cared for. Here is the hat, all assembled and covered in silk. This is the front of the hat here. And then here's the side. And then the back there. And the crown portion is secured with prick stitches. There you go. And then the interior of the brim is secured with slip stitches there. And the brim and crown and tip piece, like I said earlier, were covered separately. Then I attached them together. This black line that you see here, that is 2 strands of hand quilting thread, and that was they were attached together at the seam points right here, and then the crown piece was put on top of that. So that's how the hat looks. And this is the lining piece. And so after I put on all my trimmings, this will secure down there and it will be whip stitched right there. The hat is finished. Now I'm going to take the hat off to show you the details here. And so the front is emblazoned with these beautiful velvet flowers here. And then on the side, I have 3 dyed goose feathers. Nothing in the back, just plain in the back there. And then here's how the lining looks. And then I attached 2 little loops of yarn to match the color of my hair. And so I can put some bobby pins through that. These are some extra feathers. And these are the velvet flowers I did not use. And I did not use the leaves I ordered. But this, I got all these millinery things from a Etsy shop called Mary Not Martha. Or the other way around. I forget which one it is, but I will leave that linked below. They have lots of nice vintage millinery supplies, as well as lots and lots of lovely lace appliques. They're very pretty. My next project is a late 1890s shirtwaist, and I had just enough of this teal colored linen, 2 yards, to cut out the shirtwaist. And by just enough, I meant this is all my cabbage that I have left here. So truly just enough. I even had to decrease the volume on some of the panels so they won't be so voluminous, but they all fit on the fabric that I had. So I have the 2 sleeves, upper and lower sleeve. This is the same sleeve I used to make the late 1890s sleeves for my bodice that I made earlier in this vlog. I have the back yoke, the front panel, which will be pleated to the front yoke. The collar is already interfaced, and the front placket is interfaced as well. And so the next step is I'm going to iron all these pieces, and also I am going to just start sewing the pieces together. I'll probably start with the front and back panels attached to the yokes. Here is the shirtwaist, front and back, all put together. I have pleated the front bodice to the front yoke here, and I've also done some top stitching. I sewed on the placket and did top stitching as well, and sewed on 7 buttonholes. I have the buttons, which are going to be covered buttons. They're just setting aside to be done later because they take a toll on my fingers to make, therefore I am procrastinating on making them. And down here, I just sewed the plates. This is below the waistline. Like where my hand is right now is the waistline, so this will be far below the waistline and therefore will not be seen. This is just a way to keep the pleats nice and together there. This is the other waistband. I already have the other placket, and I have already marked the, you can't really see on camera, but I can see in person that I marked where the buttonholes are. Moving on to the back here, I attached the back to the back yoke, and I did the same top stitching, and the center back here, I had to, it's supposed to be cut on the fold, according to the pattern, but as I said previously, I don't have enough fabric, so I had to have a center back seam, which is mostly hidden by the fact I just did an inverted box pleat. So that's nice. The next thing I'm going to do is attach that collar over there. Attach the collar over here, and then I'm going to sew these side seams and hem the blouse. And then after that, I will tackle the sleeves. The shirtwaist is almost complete. I just need to still add the buttons here, which I will do tomorrow. But I have obviously sewed the side seams here, as well as sewed the hem by machine. And the reason why I have my measuring tape here is because I am going to add right here to the center back, a little bit below the waistline. I'm going to add a little piece of twill tape, and so it will be attached right here at the center back and go completely around and tie right as you see the measuring tape is doing, and it'll tie a little bit below the waist, and so it won't peek out on top of the waistband of a skirt. That's just to keep all these pleats, even though I did sew them down, it's to keep all the pleats and all the fullness in the proper area, and so it doesn't shift around as you walk and live life. In addition to sewing the side seams and hem, I also attached the collar. The collar is also finished by hand, and I tucked this in a little bit because the collar, like I had it, was straight, but it was a little too tight on my neck, and so I just folded it back to be a V. I did that on my other shirtwaist that I made here on the channel from this pattern, and it turned out rather well. So tomorrow I am going to attach the sleeves here, which I sewed together. And in addition to sewing the upper and lower sleeves together, I also did some top stitching here on the cuff to match the top stitching on the shirtwaist. And so tomorrow I will have to put the buttons on and then attach the sleeves, and we'll be done. Here is the finished shirtwaist. I have attached the buttons here. And I've actually discovered a better way to cover the buttons is that I gather the little circle of fabric before I put it over the little tongs of the button, and that saves my fingers, which is a very nice thing to discover. Only I discovered it about 100 buttons too late because I've been spending all my summer using covered buttons, and I just now discovered an easier way to do it, so But getting back to the shirtwaist here is that I have my pleats. Also here at the neck, I have a hook and thread bar there. The collar is a little tight, but it's just something to get used to. I can still breathe and that's fine, but it's just a little tight. And then I have my sleeves, puff sleeves here, all nice and cute. And then I have the waist tie that I talked about before, and then here it is at the back. And then I have the waist tie sewn on a little under the waistline here. And so like the skirt waistband would be here where my finger is, and then so you wouldn't see this tie there. But another garment done. My next project is this 1880s natural form era, really, so like 1878 to like 1881 bonnet, and the pattern from the book was actually very straightforward, and I had trouble with the last pattern that I scaled up from the book. I think that was a me problem because this pattern was absolutely perfect. And so I have assembled the tip piece and the stand here. And as you see, the stand is wired on the inside to give it more structure, and the wire itself is on the inside, so the outside remains smooth. The edges are bound with cotton flannel bias cut strips, and then the tip piece is attached on top there. And then over here is the brim piece, which is covered with silk. I didn't have a lot of this silk left from making my other bonnet, but I just had enough, and I was very happy with just having enough here. And so the brim I finished separately, and I will be attaching this. Will fold under here like that, and Then the silk pieces that I have ironed over there, one of them, as you see, has fallen. These silk pieces will then go on top of this bonnet. Here is the bonnet, all covered in silk taffeta here. The brim is stitched onto the stand, and so is the tip piece onto the stand as well from the inside. And then the stand piece is covered with a band of silk that is prick stitched on. And then this is the back of the bonnet. The bonnet sits on the head like this. And I have my trimmings, which are some of these ostrich feathers here, and some of the same trimmings, those velvet hydrangeas that I used for my 1885 bonnet hat, more properly. And so I'm going to use some of those on top of the ostrich feathers to decorate this bonnet. And then after that's put on, I will sew the lining in, which is currently hanging out on my dress form. And then this bonnet will be done. I have finished my bonnet here. I have sewn on the little velvet hydrangea flowers here. And I have also lined the inside. Excuse the rain. It is a, maybe you can see it there, a torrential downpour outside. And also there was a lightning strike a couple minutes ago and temporarily blew out the electricity in my room. So I took that as a sign from the universe to kind of stop for the night. So thankfully the bodice is done though. And the lining is really nicely whip stitched over here on the back of the bonnet. Sorry, I'm working on a bodice simultaneously with this bonnet. And so therefore that's why I keep saying bodice when I mean bonnet. And on the inside of this bonnet, I slip stitched this lining because of how this bonnet is worn. You can see this around the hairline. And then here's the other side of the velvet hydrangeas. I didn't add the teal feathers I showed earlier because the teal was a little too bright for the muted teal of the wool of the dress this is going with, and I didn't think it looked right. And also I think it overwhelmed, the feathers overwhelmed the little bonnet there. But this bonnet is done, my last piece of headwear for the trip. My next ensemble is an 1875 bodice out of the extra wool fabric I had for making my 1885 ensemble. And here is kind of like a reference and inspiration piece. Is going to point down in the back there. There's not going to be a pleat. It's just going to be straight down. And then this is how it's going to look from the side. It's going to be a very plain bodice. The pattern I used is my Victorian pattern that I used for my 1885 ensemble, but I just lengthened the bodice pieces by about 6 inches as well as flared it out. So you see there's more flare in the center back on the side back seams here, and that's to nicely fit over the little bustle here like you see in this illustration. And so these are the front panels. I actually combined the front vest piece and the front piece to create one piece. So this piece is all done. It has a giant fish-eye dart, which you can see here. The bottom edge was turned under, so was the center front edge. And then this is the back panel, which includes the back panel, the side back, and then the side piece. And just like my other Victorian ensemble I made, the side seams here have an inch seam allowance. That way I can take it out or in more easily as necessary. And the back panels in front are finished individually and the theater way, and so I can just undo this and add or subtract inches from the waist without taking off all the trim, undoing all the hem of the bodice, etc., etc. And in addition to finishing the bodice pieces, I also finished the sleeves as well. I used the same sleeve pattern, and what I did is it was a little tight on the other bodice, and so I actually gave myself a 1/4 inch at the interior arm seam, and so now I don't have to do a little cuff here and slit there, so that's nice. I hem them, and then I already put in the basting stitches for the sleeve head. And right now the bodice is going to be on standby until I get my trim in the mail, more of that green wool braid to decorate the bottom with it. and hopefully that comes very soon. Here is an update on the bodice. I have since gotten my wool braid, and I have attached 2 rows of it to the bottom of the bodice here. I forget if last time you saw this if it had buttons or not, but it has buttons now, all 9 of them, and buttonholes, as well as this little mandarin collar. And this collar here, I also outlined in the wool braid as well. It is a little bulky, but it matches the trim on the bottom of the bodice. And also I made it originally without the trim on the collar, and it just looked a little plain. And then here it is from the back of the bodice, and this will flare out a little nicer when it has the bustle, the little natural form, just little bustle on the back. And as obviously the side seams are sewn together with the 1-inch seam allowance there. And the next step is to add trim to the sleeves, add the sleeves, and the bodice will be wearable. And I'm debating whether or not to add boning to it, because I put it on, I didn't have a corset underneath, but I just put it on just with nothing else underneath it. I'm debating on whether or not to add boning, because I leave for my trip in 2 days, and I still have to pack and everything, and I want this to be done. And so I did try this on. I didn't have my corset on underneath or my skirts. I'm going to do that try on tomorrow. But I did try it on, and everything was laying really nice and smoothly, so I think I can get away with no boning for this bodice. The bodice is now done. The only thing really different from last time you saw it is that I added the sleeves. The sleeves is the same pattern I used for my 1885 bodice I made from the same fabric. There's just a little bit of puff here at the shoulder. They are upper sleeve and lower sleeve, so a 2-piece sleeve. And then they have the wool braid on the bottom. I decided just to do 1 row of braid down on the bottom, because there's already 2 rows of braid down on the bottom of the bodice. And this is another garment checked off the list.